Well, let's now bring in political analyst who's based at the University of Dundee in the UK, Musa Mdunge, and also an American expat in South Africa, Karl Carter, as they join us to have a chat ahead of the polls. Karl, I'm going to start off with you. A very good morning to you. How are you feeling ahead of tomorrow's elections?
I think we're all excited. It's clearly historic with the first Black woman candidate. Really this close to the election. And so we're all very excited. And of course, a lot, as you alluded to earlier, a lot at stake. The very future of democracy in America really is at stake. So I think everyone is really tuned in. All the expats we know have all been mailing in their votes and really, paying attention and doing all we could to support both financially, but also just by, spreading the word within our networks.
Yeah. And before I go to Musa, once again, Karl, why do you believe this election is so important? Yes, on one end, you do have the first Black woman candidate running for the presidency or the presidential seat in the United States. But what is it about this election that makes it so crucial?
Well, you touched upon January 6th. Before. And so I think that's still very fresh. We're dealing with a candidate that in Donald Trump that doesn't have a lot of morals, doesn't respect democracy. And so and frankly, is, very connected to white supremacy in America. And so I think as a Black person in America, you're obviously watching this race. But the credibility of America on a world stage also is critical, especially as you live abroad. And so I think we're like really focused on it for those multiple reasons. Of course, the economy, inflation, all of those other dynamics are also at play. And so everyone is watching the race and wanting to know that if Vice President Harris is elected, in fact, what type of 4 years do we have to look forward to versus if Donald Trump is elected? What does that look like? What does everyone's future look like? And I think we've gotten a sample of his agenda with the illegalization of a woman's right to choose, as well as the legalization and deemed unconstitutionality of affirmative action, which is having big ripples. And so, we know that this is a very conservative, very right-wing agenda that's playing itself out in America. And so when you're sitting as a person of color in the States, you know that the right wing is not for you, at least not for the majority of us. And so I think that's why we're all watching it quite closely.
Yeah, and Musa, very good morning to you as well. So earlier on, when Xoli was giving us his update ahead of the elections, he spoke about the oldest democracy. And listening into what Karl has to say now, this question around women's rights to choose, here is the oldest democracy, but they're dealing with issues that young democracies have already dealt with, and this is the choice that women have to choose what they want to do with their pregnancies. What do you make of that particular aspect of these elections? But is Donald Trump able to use his, we are going to make sure that America becomes affordable again, as a trump card?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and good morning to you and to the viewers, and good morning to Karl as well. Well, look, certainly I believe that these elections are perhaps going to be the most consequential elections of this modern era. One, because you have in Donald Trump a person and a figure who exudes, or has tried to exude in terms of his brand, this image of being an outsider. And in many ways, interestingly enough, 4 years into Biden's administration, he comes back and still seems to carry this image over. And the challenge, I think, for Kamala Harris is that though she be vice president and is part of the administration, unfortunately, vice presidents have tended not to do well in terms of elections. The reason being that you are not the president whom the buck stops at, and whom the legacy or the consequences of that administration are located. But at the same time, she sort of has to produce some sort of legacy in these past 4 years. And this has perhaps been the difficulty that Kamala Harris has had in terms of the messaging. It's one thing to prosecute a case against Donald Trump. The question that has always lingered over these past few months is, can she prosecute a case for her? And I think in the past, perhaps 4 weeks, we've certainly seen a coming together of that message where it has shifted as not just about dealing with Trump and warning people about Trump and the dangers of a Trump presidency, but also what is the vision that Kamala Harris brings to the table, particularly because we cannot ignore that there are some in society who still hold views that they cannot be led by women. And so even, the controversy of, former President Barack Obama and his comments to black men highlight perhaps this one risk for Kamala Harris in breaching that final glass ceiling. But Donald Trump's support, even among men, is not as great as pundits have put it, because when you look at the polling, she does better with women. Her support with women is far better than his support with men. So that's a positive for her on that end. But where I think her weakness may be is that Arab American support, the war in Gaza, the question of Palestine. That is something that we've got to watch out in a state like Michigan. And I'm sure Karl will perhaps have more in terms of that.
Yep. Karl, do you want to take that up?
No, I think that's an excellent point. It's so funny. I was watching The Daily Show last night, Guilty Pleasures, and, they did this whole look back, and you almost forgot about how many voters were, 100,000 actually tuned in to say, hey, we're undecided, right, as it relates to Biden. So there is that work absolutely to be done. I think that the notion of Black men not supporting Kamala Harris is actually incredibly overrated. We were actually watching a talk. My wife Saida and I were watching a talk last night about that, and it's coming in at about 20%. And so, you also have some Black voters that are skewing for Trump, and are roughly around that number. You've seen that kind of go up. So, I think some Black voters feel like, hey, I know he's not for me, but, at least he's honest about it, which I think is kind of a ridiculous mindset, but people do have that. And so I think largely the Black population, both men and women, are behind Kamala. And so we have to make sure that story is not spun, especially as a Black man who I think, we're fathers, we're husbands, we're business owners. And so, and we're, societal leaders as well. So I think everyone kind of has very clear eyes as to what's at stake. And Kamala Harris is a proven leader. We may not always agree with her policies, but that's also the checks and balances of the American system. That is democracy in action, and so we have the right to speak our mind. We have the right to mobilize. We have the right to speak with our dollars. And so, I think ultimately, all those tools, all those levers are in place for the population to communicate with the government about what we feel like is reasonable or not. And so I think regardless of you're talking Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, they both have very similar agendas and stances as it relates to the Middle East. And so I think that is still sort of the other shoe to drop in the States, that ongoing struggle happening there in Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, and just quickly, Karl, one end, and we know what happened, for instance, in 2016 when Donald Trump was contesting against Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but unfortunately didn't meet the threshold for the 270 Electoral College votes. And I wonder whether something of that nature could play out once again, that you'd have a Kamala Harris that is popular and does get the endorsement of some big celebrities, so she might get the popular vote, but not enough to actually meet the threshold of the 270 Electoral College votes. I'm going to start off with you, Karl, and then I'm going to give it to Musa as well.
No, copy that. Well, listen, I think the Electoral College is a super bad hangover from like Civil War era, and so it does continue to be a tool to be utilized. So if you look at the presidents that tend to get elected, utilizing the Electoral College over the popular vote, and Donald Trump was one of the last ones, as he actually lost the original election by 3 million votes. And a lot of people, I got so tired of being abroad, people like, how could you guys elect him? I'm like, we didn't, so please, just know that, we have to watch Electoral College. And I think that's absolutely a great note. And so then when you talk about Electoral College, now the battleground states become even more important. And so you saw this happen last time, which is why Georgia, and I'm coming out of Atlanta, shout out of Atlanta, why Georgia was so important, because he lost Georgia last year, and frankly, Atlanta and the concentration of Black voters in Atlanta was able to actually flip Georgia as it relates to their support for Donald Trump. And so it is going to be all about the battlegrounds. And so it is a bit of a left hook, right hook situation where you're going to have the popular vote, but you're also going to have to really just be super vigilant on those battleground states, and as well voter disenfranchisement. This is something that we've seen happen again and again, and so there are incredible organizations in the states that are doing their work on the ground to make sure that the vote continues to be authentic. And carry its relevancy, but it is absolutely, I think, one of the detriments of our system that we have this Electoral College that is constantly being utilized as a tool to actually undermine the value of the popular vote.
Yeah. Musa, your take on that, and Karl mentions Georgia, Atlanta, and Trump was bold enough to take his final rally there.
He better.
I would imagine his advisors would be saying he better go there, because certainly, even when you look at the polling that has been done, the average polling, certainly, within a margin of error, Donald Trump seems to be on a lead there. But, when we look at early voting, Democrats would argue that they're feeling confident about early voting and the results in Georgia. He certainly, it looks like he has somewhat of a lead in Arizona as well. But, the big boogeyman is going to be Pennsylvania. And it's interesting that even when you think of a state like North Carolina, which, you wouldn't traditionally put it among the swing states, but certainly this time around is certainly in play for the Democrats. But, just to speak on the Electoral College, I had time to think about this. And if you think about the historical context of why the American democracy is designed and formed in the way it is, it was about balancing the issue of states like California, like New York and Texas, not having too much of a dominance given their population size over smaller states. Because remember, we're talking of a country that went through a civil war. And so in order to maintain the union, the union of the United States, it is critical to balance the representation between bigger states and smaller states. But of course, then the question becomes, in times like these where elections are so contested, where the divisions are so high, and where you have a risk where one candidate or the other may in fact not accept these results, is it time to not rethink the electoral system so that it reflects, where America is and its values currently, but that's a debate that they certainly have to have. But I think it's one that is very critical. For example, if we think about what Kamala Harris is proposing on the reforms on the Supreme Court, for example, where currently one may argue that the Republicans enjoy a dominance in terms of that bench. And of course, what happened, Roe versus Wade, which led to the destruction of long-held abortion rights and productive rights for women. And the consequences thereof were born in 2022 when that red wave tsunami that was expected didn't actually materialize. And as a final point here, Aldrin, I think it's important for the viewers that we make them understand that this is not just about the presidency. We have elections happening in terms of Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate. And when you look at the two, it looks like in terms of the Senate, where about 34 seats will be contested, the Democrats are sitting at a disadvantage because they've got more seats to defend this time around. And in terms of the House of Representatives, it seems like a flip, but it looks like Democrats may likely win, depending how well Kamala Harris does. So the margins are going to tell us a lot about the movement in terms of Congress, but also the movement in the 13 gubernatorial races that are happening as well. Those are going to be important. And other races that will influence where America goes in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's important to conscientize people that it's not just about the presidency, there's more at stake.
Musa, thank you so much for your time. That was political analyst based at the University of Dundee in the UK, Musa Mdunge, as well as American expat in South Africa, Karl Carter, ahead of the crucial election that will be taking place tomorrow in the United States.